And by the way, if you misquote her, she is a lawyer.
Hey y'all, how's everybody doing today?
Good.
I'm great, thank you. So let's just, before we dive too far into this, before we get started, give me a kind of a snapshot of who you are, who the class is, and what are some aspirations that each of you have. Career, life, otherwise, it doesn't matter. Just 3 or 4. Yes.
So, let me stand up.
Thank you.
My name's Abby Irvin. I'm a sophomore here. My major is multimedia broadcast storytelling, and I have a minor in American Sign Language and a minor in strategic communication and PR. I want to be a news person. I've been wanting to be a news person since I was a kid. I grew up playing sports. I was a female athlete for about 11 years. I played hockey and lacrosse. I almost went collegiate, but I decided to choose my education over playing, and I ended up here, so.
Nice. Thank you, Abby. How many sophomores? Okay, how many freshmen? How many juniors? How many on their way out? Okay, so mostly sophomores, some juniors. Did any juniors raise your hand? Yeah.
I'm Alex Jackson. I'm a junior here at Ball State. I'm a media major with a concentration in sports reporting. I really want to be an analyst for ESPN or like Fox or CBS, but also, if that doesn't pan out, would also like to be an announcer for professional wrestling.
And so does the announcer for wrestling, you mean like WWE?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And you'd like to be an analyst in the studio, in the arena?
Studio.
Analyst, okay. Any sports in particular, just all
Football
sports?
and baseball would be my 2 top
Okay.
ones.
Okay, and then freshmen, any freshmen? Yes.
Hi, I'm Casey Alexander, freshman here at Ball State. My major is media production with a concentration in sports media. I hope to be a graphic designer and videographer for motorsports in the future.
Motorsports, nice, okay. And thank you, Casey. Any other freshmen? Yes.
Hi, I'm gonna also stand up. My name is Andy Zelaya. I am a freshman here. My major is media arts with a concentration of broadcasting and news. I have 2 minors that have nothing to do with my major. I have a scuba diving minor and a Japanese minor. My dream is to have my own news segment like Steve Hartman's On the Road. I really value those community-based stories. So that is my dream, and that is something I'm working towards.
Okay, thank you. So a little bit of variety, but all similar. Anybody interested in pursuing something that's not news or sports related, but you just have an affinity for those areas, hence you're in the class? Okay, so everyone either can find some sort of a connection with news and or sports. Okay, cool. So there's about 5,100 things that I could talk about. And yes, 5,100, I said that. What I want to speak is what you want to hear. One of the best pieces of advice that I received early on was when I had media training. So as an athlete, I was a student athlete at University of Cincinnati. I did basketball and track there. Two very different worlds when it comes to sports. And we had media training. And during the media training, they taught us, how to speak with media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Fast forward a few years, and then now I'm in the coach's seat. And so as a coach, you would go through similar media training type of prep. And one piece of advice that we received was, you don't have to answer the question that's asked. Answer what you want to say. So, that said, one of the most important things for you in your seat is, knowing that the speaker may not answer what you ask, but they're gonna say what they wanna say, how you frame your question becomes even more imperative, because there's a likelihood that your question may get skirted. So, what is it that you wanna ask? Well, in order to know what you wanna ask, you need to know what you wanna say. So begin with the end in sight. And that's not just for writing, that's for life. That's for everything. Begin with the end in sight. One of my favorite Bible verses is one that says, without a vision, the people will perish. You have to have a vision of what it is and where you're trying to go. Otherwise, you're just aimlessly walking through fields of endless opportunity. So the young lady who said scuba diving, Japanese, and news, and saying they have nothing related, well, they do have something in common, and that thing in common is you. And how you're gonna pull all those different things together to make your experience is gonna be vital. It may not necessarily directly influence your career, so to speak, but what influences your career more than you yourself? So if something influences you, thereby it influences your career. As Dr. Maria mentioned, I was a student athlete. I went on, I coached at Notre Dame straight out of college. Phenomenal experience, 27 varsity sports at Notre Dame. And I was a strength and conditioning coach there. From Notre Dame, went to Xavier University, and then from Notre Dame went to Tennessee. 2 years at Tennessee with an amazing staff, under the head coach, Pat Head Summit. Anybody ever heard of Pat Summit? Nice. That's it? Only 4 or 5 people? Seriously. Raise your hand if you've heard of Pat Summit. Okay, I feel better now. If you haven't, it's worth your career to investigate and to know not just contemporary, but also who, before the people you like and before you people you see and admire now, who paved the way for them? Who were some people that they admired? Who were some people that they looked up to? Not only is it gonna help broaden your perspective holistically, but then should you ever encounter and meet those people, knowing their touch points is gonna be vital to your connection with those people. Give me someone you look up to. Somebody just name someone professionally who you look up to. Yes?
Jim Nance.
Jim Nance, okay. Give me just a brief 2 to 3 people who you know or believe or understand have influenced Jim Nance.
I would say Vince Scully, perhaps. Maybe Jack Buck.
And one more.
One more.
But think about that.
His dad.
Okay. But do you see where we're going with this? When you find someone whom you admire or look up to professionally, personally, whatnot, don't just look at that person, look at who influenced that person. What made them, what was the scuba diver and the Japanese that made them who they are? So, from Tennessee, beautiful time, 2 years at Tennessee. Also at Tennessee was Bruce Pearl. Anybody familiar with the name Bruce Pearl? Raise your hand. Okay. Buzz Peterson, raise your hand if you're familiar with Buzz Peterson. So these are all names around one name. These are all experiences around one experience. These are all opportunities around one opportunity. Fast forward from Tennessee, blessed to go to Xavier University to coach at Xavier under head coach Kevin McGuff. Have you heard of Kevin McGuff? Anybody ever heard of Mike Babinski? Anybody ever heard of Don Rogers? Anybody ever heard of Sean Miller? Just one person, interesting. Anybody ever heard of Lute Olson? Ooh, very interesting, very interesting. From Xavier, I had beautiful opportunity to go out to Arizona, hence I mentioned Lute Olson. At Arizona, I was blessed to meet an enormous variety of people. From Arizona, came to Muncie. His Has anybody ever heard of Brady Sally? Oh, just 6, no more? No one else has heard of Brady Sally? Okay, very interesting, very interesting. From here, I went to Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, has anybody ever heard of Candace Parker? Lisa Leslie? Magic Johnson? Snoop? Okay, there we go. Well, I still don't see some hands. Who's not heard of Snoop? Okay. So, from Los Angeles to Chicago, phenomenal opportunities in Chicago. Has anyone ever heard of Renee Ferguson? Amazing journalist. I was invited to have dinner at Renee Ferguson's home. John Rogers had a dinner and invited me, and there I met and got acquainted with Renee Ferguson. She invited me to her home for dinner. Walk into her home, and then there's Emmys on the shelf, and then you sit down and you realize, and she says, "Oh yes, the Obamas were here last week." I'm like, oh. It's quite an experience when you get to know the people who have influenced the people who you admire. The people behind the person. Part of being a good journalist, part of being a good investigator, part of being a good storyteller, part of being a good, curious mind, an explorer in this life experience is knowing the people behind the people and the stories behind the story. Go deeper. Go deeper. So that said, not answering the question that's asked, but being able to speak the narratives that you want to speak. If you watch the news, you'll quite often see people do that. They'll speak what they want to speak and get their touch points on, and may not exactly answer the question that's asked. So you need to know, as one asking the question and one who will one day answer the questions, what is it that you want to say? Because that will influence not only what comes out of your mouth, but then what questions you ask, how you write it, and the perception by which you hear and receive the information. You've all heard the story, one person stands at a street corner and in Times Square and observes the billboards. Another person stands at the same street corner in Times Square and observes the different cars going up and down. Another person observes people's outfits. One person could stand here, 10 people could stand here and observe 10 different things, 20 different things, the numbers go on and on. But the perception is going to influence your output. What you say, what you hear, what you write, the story you tell, and how that unfolds, and how it reads. Because then although you may say, anybody ever have a discussion with somebody, and the next you know it's an argument, and then they're saying something and you're like, that's not what I said. Who has that not ever happened to? Okay, just live a little longer. So what is said and what is conveyed are two different things. What is expressed, what is said, and what is conveyed. So what are you expressing, what are you actually saying, and what message and underlying tones are you conveying in whatever it is you're putting out, your discourse. So that one piece of advice, you don't have to answer the question that's asked. Do you see how many branches that can go off into? So I'll ask the question again, what is it that you all want to know? And dig deeper and really think, what is it that you want to know? What is the end in sight? Is there an assignment attached to your note-taking today? There is. Okay, so who's taking notes for the assignment? Okay, just a few of you. Who's taking notes for their own life input? And who's taking notes for their career progression? Okay, so we got a little bit of a mix. Is there any other thing that I didn't touch on that somebody may be excited to glean from our conversation today? Yes.
I did want to ask you this, Rowan Elbert and from being under Pat Summitt and a lot of other great coaches, specifically from Pat Summitt, what was something you learned that you take with you today?
What do you want to know that for? For your life, for your career, or for the assignment?
All of the above.
Big one, because that's going to influence my answer.
All right, for life, I would say.
For life. Because of Muffet McGraw and Pat Summitt, I confidently became a mother while holding the career. I have 2 beautiful children. They're amazing. Like most mothers, I think they're the best ever. And I'm blessed and fortunate that I get the privilege to be their mother. Parenting while in the sports industry is not for the faint. Whether you're a father or a mother, it is tough to parent in a demanding industry. And sports isn't the only demanding industry, it's just the one that I'm most familiar with. So choosing to be a parent, and I say choosing to be a parent, because it's 2025, it's by choice. You choose to be a parent and to grow, nurture, and invest in children. To have full responsibility for them is a task. And Pat Summitt showed me, and I learned from her firsthand, how to gracefully do both. She brought her son, Tyler, to the office daily. He was with us. There was no separation of home and work. Home and work were integrated into one. And so that's what I did. I just brought my children right along with me everywhere. They would be on the bench, they would be behind the bench, they'd be in press conferences. I mean, everywhere except for the locker room and the huddle, my children were there. And we've enjoyed a beautiful life together. We've traveled to many, many countries, been around. My son was greeted by James Harden, and this is back when Angry Birds was a little game. He'll be mortified I'm telling this story, but James Harden sees my son, we're in the gym, and he's like, what's up? I'm like, hey, what's up, James, what's up? I said, this is my son. So he's like, hey, nice to meet you. And for those of you who don't know, James Harden is an NBA player, or NBA professional. So he said, hey man, I'm about to go in the gym to shoot. You want to come in and shoot with me? My son was like, no, I'm in the middle of a game of Angry Birds. But that life was just their norm. They were used to being around a variety of people and personalities. So integrating those two would probably be the best and one of the most impactful things I've learned from Pat Summitt.
Casey Alexander, freshman here. You're from a smaller town, Pickerington, Ohio. How, you mentioned earlier you begin with the end in sight. Even with humble beginnings, did you have that end in sight, and how has that influenced your entire career?
Thank you, great question. I love that you asked about Pickerington. Yes, I am from a small, when we first moved to Pickerington, there was one traffic light, and it was not a red, yellow, green light, it was a flashing red light. And then eventually it got a full 3-color traffic light, and we thought we were the big time then. So very beautiful community in Pickerington. When I was in 3rd grade, my dad took me to a basketball camp. The youth sports, because we were way out in the country, I used to play in the cornfields and in the woods. That was my free space. The big thing to do was to play sports. And they had a camp for girls, and I went to the basketball camp, and in walks Nancy Darsh and Melissa McFerrin, 2 coaches at Ohio State. And the next day at camp, in walks Lori Pirtle, the head coach for Capital University. So on the way home from camp, I asked my dad, I said, Dad, what do these women do? What do these people do? Because at the time, it wasn't even, there was no real thought of the differentiation between female athletes, male athletes. It was just, do you play sports, yes or no? And I said, what is it that they do for a job that gives them so much free time to coach basketball? And he said, well, that is their job. I said, what? You can get paid to coach basketball? And he said, yes. And so at 3rd grade, I said, that's what I want to do. So begin with the end in sight. And journey took a lot of twists and turns, but I always held on to that as a light, as a marker of something that I wanted to be able to do. And blessed and fortunate that I was able to have enough support. My coaches at Pickerington, the teachers, Coach Roach. There was a lot of coaches who invested. All of our basketball staff was amazing. But Coach Roach was my track coach. And he gave me a belief in myself that beyond surpassed my even thought of what I could achieve. Just a few short weeks ago, Coach Roach and I were on the phone. And once again, he inspires me to go achieve more. Because his next question is, okay, Ann, what are you doing next? I said, oh, come on, Coach. He said, no, what's next? What's next? Keep going, keep going, keep going. So that was my coach from one of my many fortunate coaches from Pickerington.
Hi, my name's Sam Klug. I'm a freshman here too. What was it like going from Cincinnati to Xavier, knowing that's a big rivalry between the two schools, and how's that dynamic going from a player to a coach?
Do you want to know for the
Story.
assignment?
Yes, assignment.
For the assignment. And then what is the premise of your assignment? What's your angle on your assignment?
I mean, I don't know yet. I probably have to hear more of the press conference, but I'm probably going off of your journey from coaching in college all the way to the WNBA and probably your life journey, I guess.
What do you want to say in your story? Not what do you want to write, but what is the message? What are you hoping that your story makes an impact? How do you want your story to be impactful? Who do you want to reach? Who's your target audience for your story?
Maybe little girls growing up seeing that you can make it to a position like you did, maybe touching on how, like you just said, you went to that basketball
Why do you
game.
want to write to little girls? Do you have a little sister?
No, I have two older sisters, but I think everybody deserves an opportunity to, to look up to someone and for them to impact you.
Do you think that there's little girls who don't have those opportunities
For
to
sure.
look up to someone? You do?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you feel passionate about writing this story?
Sure.
Okay, very good. Now what's the question again?
And so what was it like going from a player at Cincinnati to being a coach at Xavier, knowing there's a deep rivalry there between the two schools? And what was kind of the transition from being a player to a coach?
Okay, those are two very different questions. Thank you for your question. To keep it brief, the transition to the rival school was not too challenging. As a fan, your emotions are, forgive me for saying this, blindly aligned to some random entity that you have no real reason to have emotional ties to like that, over the wins and losses. And that's just my perspective. But you do it for the joy. As a fan, there's an intrinsic value in rooting for a particular team. As the athlete, as the professional, it's task at hand. So after graduating from University of Cincinnati, I did go on to Notre Dame, and then from Notre Dame to Tennessee. So there was some gap in the middle where my ideology was able to shift and grow from the athlete, the student athlete, to the professional. And as you know, as a coach, I mean, you play so many teams a year. So 3 years into it, we had played against and competed against so many different teams that game after game, the games come rapid fire. It's a profession. So having the opportunity to go to Xavier University, I saw it as a blessing and a joy. Here's another university that's very different. Cincinnati, big public school, Xavier, small private institution. Cincinnati, just a wide variety, amazing diaspora of personalities and people. And Xavier, a university very committed to the Jesuit tradition and the faith beliefs on campus. I enjoyed being at Xavier. It was an experience unlike any other. And I'll give this quick story of my time at Xavier. And I hope this illustrates how to appreciate something in every opportunity. The biggest thing I can encourage you guys, especially in sports, is to, and I know you have to, at some level as a journalist, play into those rivalry type of storylines. But then again, please, I just implore you to go deeper, because behind the rivalry, there's a lot of commonality. We would play open gym together every summer. Half of the Xavier team was my AAU teammates. I played on the AAU team. We were top 5 in the country. It would be considered like the EYBL circuit type of a team. And we had players on our team go to UConn, Vanderbilt. 4 players on our team went to Cincinnati, and 4 went to Xavier. So we had that common bond with each other for years. Kevin McGuff, who was the head coach at Xavier when I went there, was also at Notre Dame. So he and I coached together at Notre Dame. So it wasn't so much that I was going to Xavier. Yes, it was Xavier, but I was reuniting with a dear friend who I coached with at Notre Dame. His wife and I were best friends. So here I am, I get to work with my best friend's husband, and we get to coach together. The staff at Xavier, I ended up marrying James Whitford, and then we had a beautiful time together. So it became a family type of environment. Does that answer your question?
Alex Jackson, you mentioned how multiple people can influence everybody. Everybody in this room probably has 2 to 3 people that influence in their time. You've mentioned a lot of names so far, but who would be your 2 to 3 people that have influenced you throughout your entire life or career?
I can't name 2 to 3. There's just way too many. And so what I could probably do is influence, I'll say this. I'll name 2 to 3 people who don't know me that have influenced me, but they don't know me. First and foremost, Coach Prime. Hands down. When I was young, my brother had the TV on, and I was in the other room, and I heard on the TV this gentleman talk about how much he loves playing defense and how he'll wait in the wings, make the passer think that the receiver is open, and then he'll just go steal the ball. And then I was like, wait a minute, that's what I do. So I go in the other room to say, who is this? And my brother's like, oh, this is Deion Sanders. So I'm watching, and I immediately start following, not because I want to be a fan, because I want to see, does he play defense as good as I do? Because he's doing a lot of talking, but can he really play? And the way he approached as an athlete, the way he approached the game, the way he then approached the business of sports. When you look good, you feel good. When you feel good, you play good. When you play good, they pay good. That's Deion Sanders. So just the mentality of how each thing you do affects the next. So begin with the end in sight. And I saw him then transition into, as we know, a father, baseball. I did 2 sports at the University of Cincinnati, and one day I was training, so I had to do a lot of training on my own because of the 2 sports, and they sometimes overlapped. I did a lot of working out on my own, and one day I was in the stadium, running the stadium stairs, and there he was, sitting in the football arena about to shoot a commercial. I couldn't believe it. So I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm a sweaty mess. How do I introduce myself? But, you know, he's an athlete. So, you know, down there, the guy says, you know, you can't run up there. And I was like, well, can I go introduce myself? And then the guy, you know, security said, go ahead. So I go up, I said, you know, Dion, Mr. Sanders, nice to meet you, blah, blah, blah. So he gives me this big smile, and he was like, you're working out by yourself? I said, I got to, I have no choice. And then he just smiled and nodded, and he was like, that's what's up. He said, well, good luck. Thank you, go our separate ways. Inspired would be an understatement. Things I did took off to another level from there. And then obviously now he has continued that same passion into his coaching and what he's able to do with his student athletes and beyond, because the sky's the limit for him. There is no limit for him. He'll go beyond that limit as well. So he's been a big influence from afar. Probably the other who does not know me but has a major impact would be Michelle Obama. When I read Michelle's book, Becoming Michelle, and she talked about her experience in law school. And when I went through law school, I was really encouraged by her sharing her experience through law school and how she was pulled in so many different directions. There was just a lot going on. And then professionally, her making the choice to step away from the corporate law and to support and join in a team with, get in the trenches with President Obama when he was in the grassroots campaign and prior to even campaigning, just a grassroots effort of community development and community advocacy. So there's a large portion of my life that I devote to my passions in the community. And there's times where I'm thinking to myself, this is too much nonprofit work, this is too much giving back, and I'm giving too much of myself. I think about First Lady Obama quite often, and I just get inspired to continue to give into the community and to sow into the world that we're all growing up in and that we're all growing children in. And then the third would be Paulo Coelho, who is an author.
Did you spell that?
No. Paulo Coelho.
It's Paulocoelho.
Thank you. Who's an author. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Hello, my name is Grant Godwin,
Hi, Grant.
and my question for you is, what was it like coaching the Chicago Sky on a collegiate level as a coach?
Great question. Now, why would you like to know that?
Because I'm curious about what's it like the day in the life of the WNBA? Curious about that. What's it like coaching?
And why Chicago and not Los Angeles?
Because you were a head coach. So I mean, I would like to know the story behind you as a head coach, like your experience coaching the Chicago Sky.
Head coach and again, I'm only pushing you guys because you're students and we're here to fine tune. Okay, so head coach and
General manager.
general manager. Now that's a whole nother way of it. So there's a head coach, then there's a GM. So how can I best answer your question?
Just talk about the experience of being a GM and a head coach.
Okay.
That's all I want to know.
Okay. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but that's a great question. But you see the layers here that you can go into. being a head coach would have been very different had I not also been a GM. So it's hard to separate the two in silos. Being a GM would have been very different had I not been also the head coach of the team. Particularly, as you can imagine, I'll just give you one day. And I wish I could give you a whole lot, but I'll just go into one day in particular. Who can guess what some of the most fun days, I'll just think of it in a GM world now. Put your GM, anybody familiar with the inner workings of being a GM? Okay. So what is your name again?
Grant.
Okay, Grant. So as a GM, name a few days that are like major red flag days as a GM.
Well, you have the trade deadline.
Trade deadline, number one. I love that you said that first.
You have the collective bargaining agreements that you have to follow because front offices typically
Yes,
have
but
to
we're
follow.
on days. We're on days now. What days? Name some days that are big days. Trade deadline day is a huge day.
The off season, of course.
Off season days.
The draft.
Draft days.
Free agency.
Free agency. Yes, yes. So those are big days. So now, draft days before the training camp. So you have some time. Trade deadline though is in the middle of the season. So you're at practice, coaching, then you go upstairs and make a trade of the players you're just then coaching. Then after you make the trade, you go outside and get on the bus to tell the player you just traded that she needs to get off the bus because you just traded her. So being a head coach and a GM, Grant, is the way I'm in there. And so that's the unique difference between my experience in the WNBA at Los Angeles with Los Angeles Sparks versus with Chicago Sky is two very different roles. With Los Angeles, I was a coach and I got to enjoy, blessed to enjoy the most amazing team and players. And you have all of those joys that you get from coaching. And we won the championship. We won the 2016 WNBA championship. And that is a whole nother can of stories that I would love to tell one day. If anybody ever wants to write about that, I got stories for days for you. Shifting from the joys of being able to be an assistant coach and then transitioning into being both the GM and the head coach was a very different perspective. Goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of class, perspectives. So here's another thing you have to think about as a coach now. So we talked a little bit about the GM as a coach. You have to always be thinking about the time. So speaking of time, I need a timekeeper. How are we doing on time? Young man, you have a watch. What time is it? Where are we?
We got about a half hour.
Okay. And you'll keep my clock for me. Thank you. What's your name?
Josh Gafford.
Thank you, Josh. So as a coach now, Grant, you're constantly thinking about the time, whether it's the time each player's on the court, the time each player's standing. Anybody ever heard the term load management? Yes, you've got to always be thinking about this. What play to run, whether it's down to the nuance of the shot clock, how much time you have left in the timeout, on and on and on. So there's the business side, then there's the coaching side. And merging them both is challenging, particularly in the WNBA where there's not the benefit of a big staff. So now imagine trade deadline. Usually you've got 2 or 3 phones going. You've got a few people to answer different calls. You know, someone you can say, hey, can you call Minnesota, see what they want to do, you know, with Maya Moore. You know, obviously they're not going to trade her, but you make the phone call anyway. You know, call Seattle, and so you get all these phone calls going, and you've got a staff and a team. Michael Fisher and Penny Toller. Penny Toller was the GM of Los Angeles. Michael Fisher was the assistant GM, and then Thomas Archie was like the assistant GM. So there was a team working together. With Chicago, Our management team, guess how many we had on our GM staff? 1. It was a staff of 1. So I'm a staff of 1 on the management side. I have no assistant GM, no secretary, no administrative assistant, and the head coach. So Grant, it was quite an experience. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for allowing me to press and go a little bit deeper. I appreciate you responding so well. Now that you guys know that you're gonna get pressed, answer your hand and raise your hand and embrace it, because you want to get something out of this class. You're gonna reap what you sow.
I'm Alexia Bird, a sophomore.
Hi,
I was doing a little bit of research on you, just to see what you were about and what people were saying about you. I saw something, is it correct that you were fired from the Chicago Sky?
What do you mean by fired?
I don't know. I just came across the headline. I came across the headline, and that was one that was real
And
popular.
what
out
did the
there.
headline say?
Head coach Amber Stock
Stocks.
was fired. Stocks, yeah, was fired from the Chicago Sky. That's quite literally what most of them were saying.
Yeah, my
But is
contract
that
was
the
not
right
renewed,
word?
but I did fulfill my contract.
Okay. And so I was just kind of curious, like, how that played into your plan, and did you expect to see that coming, and how you worked with that, or like after that?
Great
and, like,
question.
how that made you operate, kind of like facing diversity or change like that.
Thank you. Who's heard of Tyrone Willingham? Give another name. I don't know any names that you guys would know. Who's familiar with the industry of sports? Let's just say broadly. How often are professional coaches moved around?
Quite
Do you think any of us are surprised? It's part of the business. Players are traded, coaches move. This is the business. And you go into the business knowing the business. And you embrace the business. There are coaches who have won. There have been coaches who get Coach of the Year and then are not renewed a year later. It's also mindful to know, and this is just for your own input to know, contract-wise, okay, so now we're getting into the nuances of lawyering. So from there, I went on, finished law school, and am immersed into the business side of the industry. Love the business side of the industry. And one of the biggest things to always wrap your head and believe and know this no matter what it is in life. Don't you ever for a second get to thinking, no matter what it is or where you are, don't you ever for a second get to thinking that you're irreplaceable. That is the world we live in. And don't ever for a second get to thinking that something in your life is irreplaceable. There's a reason, a season, and a lifetime. So when you go into a situation, they give 2-year contracts for a reason. Because they anticipate having you there for what? 2 years. So my contract with Chicago was a 2-year, third-year option. I will tell you this, at the end of those 2 years, my skin became clearer, my nails became stronger. And I had a lot of joy and beautiful time with my children. We traveled, we went to Japan. Yep. There's just been, life opens up so many beautiful opportunities. This summer we anticipate traveling with another team to Brazil. I was able to work with a team preparing for the Tokyo Olympics. I was able to go work with the Indiana Pacers. So when you say something like, and this is what journalists do, so I love that you did it because that's what journalists do, is there's not a, whether you say I was fired or the contract wasn't renewed, to me there's a big difference because I'm a lawyer, right? And as I'm sure you guys know, there's a legal difference in how that stuff pans out. But as you go into the business, it's part of it. Every single coach has been through or gone through or will go through a transition. You're going to move from one team to another team. It's part of it. Move and flow with it. Be like water, wu wei. Go with the flow. And life is a beautiful journey. So was I surprised? No, not at all. And the next coach was there a few years, and then they were gone, and the next coach was there a few years, and they were gone, and then now they're on another new coach. 'Tis the business. And same with Los Angeles. The coach that I was there with, we won the WNBA championship. We won the championship, and he was coach of the year. A year later, they decided they wanted to part ways with him. They bring in somebody else, that person's there a year or two, part ways. Derek Fisher gets theirs, a year there or two, part ways. That's the business. You're welcome. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I'll come back. I'll go to this young lady.
My name is Jennifer Thomas. I'm also a freshman. So you talked about how you went to that camp in 3rd grade, and that's when you kind of knew that you wanted to be a coach. Was there ever a point during your life where you considered a different type of option for your, in the future, like for your career, or something that might have like stopped you and like kind of like discouraged you from that?
Yes, but no. Yes to your first question was considering something different, but no, not because I was discouraged. Considering something different because there's so many things to do, I don't want to just do one thing forever. So never did I say I want to coach basketball and only coach basketball and not do anything else for the rest of my life, because that would be a boring life. And that's not the type of life that I like to live. Some people do. Some people coach and they coach for 30 years and that's the one thing they want to do and that's it. That's never been my desire. My desire has always been to be able to coach and ... and scuba dive and travel, right? And I have not gone scuba diving, but I have gone snorkeling, so maybe one day we'll go down to the deep waters. So my desire has always been to coach and ... So in my mind, the easiest way to do that would be to coach high school. And believe it or not, that's the one level I have never coached at. So discouraged. I can't say I was discouraged, perhaps in the traditional sense, professionally. There are times where you want to pivot. I could have stayed in the WNBA like a lot of people, but with 2 children and going back to the lesson I learned from Pat Summitt, who asked the Pat Summitt question. Going back to the lesson I learned from Pat Summitt, I said, okay, well, here I'm at a point. My children, I brought them traveling around the country with me everywhere I go. What if I followed my children for a little bit? So I dove into coaching my children. And it's paid dividends. My children are just blessed, blossoming, blooming in their goals and in what they want to do. And had I continued the coaching at the professional ranks and moving them around, they loved LA, of course, what child doesn't love LA? They loved Chicago when we lived out and we had a nice lawn, but then the next year I said, hey, let's live in the city, and we moved into a high rise in the city, and then of course they hated that. Because my son would be on the balcony dribbling his basketball, and his poor ball fell over the balcony. And of course we're on like the 21st floor. So he lost his basketball. And you know, you're coaching, so I don't have time to go to the store to go get him another one, so he's gotta wait. And then, you know, you're in the middle of downtown Chicago, so going to Target it's not easy. It's not like being in Muncie. So I pivot and say, okay, well, hold on, what can we do? How can we rearrange this to be a little bit different? So now, as in the shoes that I'm in now, being on the administrative and the lawyering side of the industry, I get to immerse myself in my number one passion, which is being a mother. And again, I cannot thank Muffet McGraw and Pat Summitt enough for being the encouragement there. Yes.
Casey Alexander, freshman here. In 2009 to 2013, you worked at the...
I'm sorry, 1 second. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
From 2009 to 2013, you worked as the program director and head coach of the Tucson Heat program, which is a youth sports program in Arizona.
Where'd you find that at?
Google. There's a lot on you.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So they, an important philosophical pillar of their program is academic excellence. Would you say that your own commitment to youth sports and your dedication and coaching as a whole in college and in the professionals has led to your adoption of that same motto?
What motto?
The promotion and commitment to academic excellence as well as basketball excellence.
I'm probably, if you ask my son's school, they'll say I'm not committed enough to his academic excellence. Because I'm like, dude, is your work turned in? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. And then their school's like, did you check? No, I did not check. He's a junior in high school. Turn your work in. So how many of you, your parents, checked your homework your junior and senior year in high school? Okay, so I don't feel so bad. I probably should. I probably should a little bit more. It's a fine line. It's a fine line. I know I should do more. So my commitment to academic excellence is probably not as strong as it should be. But I do have a strong commitment to educational excellence. And I'll put key differentiation from Malcolm X on the difference between education and academics. Education is your life learning. What you learn and embrace, engage, immerse yourself in life. That your education is your responsibility. Academics are the grades you get. And I know a lot of people who have strong academics but very poor education. And I know a lot of people who have a phenomenal education with little academics. My grandfather, and this is his ring I wear on my thumb, this is my grandfather's ring. He passed, and he had to leave home at a very, very young age, to go work, away from home, away from family, because he was a big man. He's almost 7 feet tall and a big, strong man. So he had a very quick immersion into life education. And I'm sure you can imagine going from, and just paint this picture with me in your mind's eye, of a young boy going from Gullah Geechee territory in South Carolina, traveling over the Appalachian Mountains into rural Georgia at a very young age. Then during the Great Migration, meeting my grandmother and moving my grandmother and then their future family up to Akron, Ohio. And that's where I'm from, is Akron, Ohio. stopping in Cincinnati, which was a hub, a gateway city for a lot of our tribe who moved through the South and up to Akron and other cities in the North. That's education. Now, how much academics were with that? Very little. But look, here I am today. GPA not required, but education essential. So a commitment, a strong commitment to education. When we travel, I like to go to museums. When the teams would travel, I like to give teams time to go engage yourself with the city. It's not just about winning the game. Use this opportunity, engage with the city, go overseas. When I go overseas to scout players, not only did I meet and we had the dinners and do the free agent thing and try to get them to sign with my team, but then also taking time to go see Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, or to put my feet in the Mediterranean in Israel, to enjoy Tel Aviv more than just the Tel Aviv airport. When I'm in Krakow, when I was in Krakow, to actually stop and take time to see the castles in Poland. In Ukraine, which was the scariest moment of my life by far, and I wish that on no one. We were mid-flight. I was mid-flight, and there was a political decision that was made while I was in the air, on the airplane. So when I land, they said, "You're an American?" And I'm like, "Yes." And they said, "Okay," which you have to, they can see your passport, so saying no does you no good. Just say yes, go with the flow. Be like water, you gotta go with the flow. So they said, "Okay, well, you can't go to," I was headed to Turkey. They said, "You can't go to Turkey." I said, "Okay, well, I gotta get to Turkey. I got to get to Istanbul." So they said, "Well, the only way you can get there is if you go through Ukraine." So I said, "Okay." So I had to go to Ukraine. I was going from Poland to Turkey, but I couldn't go. So I had to go Poland, Ukraine to Turkey. So I go from Poland to Ukraine, I get there, and you get off the plane, and then they said, "Okay." They said, it was men with guns, the whole nine. They said, "Okay, we need 4 lines. Americans over there, anyone part of the European Union here, any other internationals here, and then, where was I? Ukraine. If you're Ukraine, you just go through." So it's like, okay, so then I was traveling, I met some people traveling, and then they said, "We need you to walk with her." And I was like, "I don't know her." And they're like, "We know, but we need you to walk with her," because they were men. And they said if it's a man with a group and there was a woman. So I was like, I don't know, there's just a lot going on when you're traveling, right? And mind you, going back to Grant, to your question, I'm just there to recruit some players. But this is life, and life is happening. And so when you're writing these stories, look past the stat line, because this is when I signed that player, and everybody's like, "Oh, you signed this player," but what did I have to go through to get her? So they said, "Okay, you need to stay in a hotel tonight, and then we're gonna fly you out in the morning." So yeah, your face, that's what my face did. And they said, "And you have to leave the airport." Now, everyone knows when you're traveling, you don't leave the airport. And I had no visa because I wasn't, so it's like, okay, if you leave and you can't get back in, now you're in a country without a visa. So it's like, okay, but you don't argue. You just, at some point, you just have to go with the flow and just trust. And this is where, going back to my faith, I said, okay, I need to rely on my faith. And this is going back to Paulo Coelho. And if you read the book, and you'll know what the book is when you come across it, you'll know. And you'll be prepared for your moment, just like I was prepared for this moment. So thankfully, and thank you for asking that question, thankfully, because I had read a particular book, the #1 bestseller of Paulo Coelho's, my mind went back to that moment. I said, okay, I'm just gonna go with it. So we leave the airport, they usher you out, and then boom, the doors shut behind you. So you're standing now I'm in Ukraine, airport doors are closed behind me, and I'm with some people, and the only other person I'm with that speaks English is this random woman. But she's super shy and quiet. But then the other people don't speak English because there was no other Americans but me. So they say, okay, and we're like, well, how do we get to the hotel? So they say it's through the woods. So I said, hold on, I said, what? They said, you gotta walk through the woods, and then on the other side of the woods, there's the hotel. So I'm like, I've seen enough movies to know that I'm not about to walk through the woods. It's pitch black. It's the middle of the night. And they had already ushered us all in these different groups and lines. So then the guy said, well, the only other way to get there is to walk on the highway, and but there's no sidewalk. So I said, and I have my little carry-on bag, and I said, I'm gonna take my chances on the highway. And everyone else in the group went through the woods. And I said, I can't do it. I'm gonna take my chances on the highway. And the guy was like, you're gonna get hit. I said, at least if I get hit, my body's laying on the highway and somebody will see. If something happens in the woods, ain't no telling. So then they're like, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. Now these are the people that work at the airport, the Ukrainians. But as far as the passengers go, none of the other ones spoke English, but the one. So I said, I'm going to the highway. So I'm walking on the highway in the rain in the middle of the night to get to this hotel that you can't see because there's all woods. So I'm like, I don't even know if this is real. But I read the book, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna be like water and just go with it. And my faith has gotten me. Have anybody heard the saying, we've come this far by faith? Okay. My faith has gotten me from the humble beginnings in Pickerington, Ohio, to Notre Dame, first to Cincinnati, then to Notre Dame, to Tennessee, coaching in the Final Four. This is my SEC championship ring. This is then to Xavier, this is one of my A-10 championship rings. I don't have on my Final Four ring. I don't have on my state championship ring. I don't have on my other A-10 championship ring. I don't have on my WBA championship ring. We only wore 2 today. So my faith has got me that far, so I'm like, okay, here I am, let me just go and just trust. And so I get there, and then it's literally like something you have seen out of a movie. Now, do I have enough time to give a side? Do you guys want to hear a story that has nothing to do with your interviews? Okay, so when I was coaching at Xavier, I was recruiting. And we were on the hop at Xavier. We were clicking on all cylinders, let me tell you. And this is, little old Xavier in Cincinnati, which is not little old Xavier now. But at the time, we really had to push the pedals. And I was working the recruiting, and one night I was driving from one recruit to the other recruit. And I was tired, so I stopped. I don't play with fatigue. When I get tired on the road, I stop. Don't drive sleepy. It's not worth it to you and the other families that are out. So I pull over at this hotel. It's a snowstorm, and there's no cars in the parking lot except for one. So I'm like, there's no way this hotel is open. So I'm like, well, maybe it's because it's a snowstorm. So I go into the hotel, and I'm in my 20s at the time. I go into the hotel, and this is like a movie. There's nobody there. It's perfectly quiet. So I'm like, this is bizarre. There's no TV going in the lobby. It's like, is this place even open? So I go to the front desk, and this gentleman comes from the back, and then he's kind of looking, and I'm looking, and then I'm like, are you open? And he was like, yeah, we're open. I was like, okay. He was like, how can I help you? And I was like, well, I need a room. And he's like, oh, okay, hold on. So I hear him go in the back and say to another guy, she wants a room. So the other guy's like, So I hear some rumbling around. I'm like, what are they doing? So then they come back out and they're like, so they're trying to figure out how to, and I'm like, well, he's like, I go, well, is it on the computer? And he's like, the computers are down. Yeah. So I'm like, wait a minute, this is, and then you see those scary movies like Hostel and things like, so I'm like, wait a minute, what's happening here? So then they end up giving me a room. They just take my credit card, manually write it down. We'll write down your credit card number. We'll put it in the system in the morning. So, and I'm exhausted. I'm in the middle of nowhere. And this is what college you see that we signed the number one recruiting class. Well, what did we have to go through to get that number one recruiting class, right? So I'm like, okay, well, I'm tired. It's a snowstorm. I can't keep driving. So I'm sure it's fine, right? Here's me, little girl from Pickerington, naive. Oh, I'm sure it's fine. Back in St. Olaf. So he gives me a key. There was no card key, it was a key to my room. So I go and I'm like, okay, this is strange. So I get there and then every hair on my body was on, like, standing up on my arms, like something's not right. So I'm looking around, so I'm like, well, let me just go downstairs and go to my car. So I walk downstairs to go to my car to look for something, but I'm looking around, no one is in the hotel. So it's completely empty. And then I get back up to my room and I look out the window and there's no cars in the parking lot but mine and that other one. I'm looking for tracks in the snow. There's no car tracks, no sign of anybody in this joint but me. So then I'm just like, you know what? I gotta get out of here. Something's not adding up. So I just left. So as I'm leaving, the guy's like, wait, where are you going? I go, I gotta go. And he's like, where are you going? And then I stop and then I look and then I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, I don't owe you an explanation for anything. And I just turned around and walked away and left. Get back to the university and say, by the way, if you were a random charge for a hotel, this is what happened. And they were like, be safe. So fast forward to Ukraine. So now, because of these past experiences, where you get on to your life education. Because of these past experiences, now when I'm in Ukraine, and they give me a key, and I'm looking around, and everything looks, clearly it's a functioning hotel. I finally do make it through the highway and get there. And then they say, everybody sit in the lobby, and they call you up to the front desk one at a time. And then the first question is, are you American? And I'm like, yes. And then they say, okay. And then she hands me a key. I get upstairs to my room. I like prop my chair by my door. I sleep with my sneakers on just in case I gotta bolt and make a run for it, right? The scariest night I've ever had. I like slept like this, fully dressed with like my hand on my suitcase, just ready to go if I needed to go. Wake up the next morning, get back to the airport, and they say no problem. I catch a flight, make it to Istanbul, and it was all good. Learn, then the player I actually was meeting in Istanbul was ironically Ukrainian. So I learned enough. I try when I meet the players or meet anybody from another country to learn how to at least give the greetings, salutations in their language. So I was able to meet with her and had some experience enough because of my wonderful night, speaking enough Ukrainian that I could engage with her a little bit and try to sign her as a free agent. So, side story to somebody's question. I don't know whose question that was. Whose question was that? Thank you. Oh no. Whose question was that? That was your question. Okay. Oh, your
I'm
question.
talking about education.
Oh yes, education. So life education. Life will give you enough education. Don't just think that your academics are your education. Life, Dr. Maria, if I may, can help enhance your academics and, most importantly, your education. And if there's one thing, how am I doing on time?
3 minutes.
If there's one thing, and I'll leave it at this and then open it up for any last questions, if there's one thing I would leave you with, y'all, is this. Glean. Glean. As much as you can from as many as you can. Because if you think that what you get out of the textbooks change, let me tell you. Y'all don't even have textbooks, I know, you're like, what's a
We
textbook?
don't use it.
The information online, it changes. Definition of words change. This stuff is all made up, and it's fluid, and it does not last. So you need to learn what you need to learn for the end that you have in sight. Begin with your end in sight. Trust when people say you need to learn this, go ahead and learn it. Things that you may not even think are relevant, learn it, learn it, learn it, learn it, learn it, learn it. And then after you learn it, apply it, apply it, apply it. Then after you apply it, practice it, tweak it, hone it, sharpen it, develop it, cultivate it, and then start the process all over again. Learn some more, apply some more, and on and on and on. That to me is my life and my journey. So now it's law school, so what's after that? What's next? I don't know. Maybe a PhD in anthropology. Who knows? Who knows? Any more questions? I'm sure there's at least one more. Let's get one more great one. I will go to the gentleman behind you. Yes.
Aiden McNally, I'm a sophomore here. I've always been very curious from a coaching standpoint. When building a roster in the draft, free agency, or the trade deadline, do you take star power or a team scheme fit more into account when going after your potential piece?
Great question. It depends on the objective. It depends on the objective. Every objective is not to win the championship. It can't be. Can't be. The game. Look at the game last night. The game last night was about making them dollars. And so you're fooling yourself if you think that it's all just about getting the win and the whole thing is structured around getting the win and having the cleanest game possible. Look at what's going on in college athletics today with the profit sharing and the NIL. Look at what happens here within just this college alone. So it depends on what the objective is, the objective of the owners on the professional sports. And some owners own multiple teams, and quite frankly, some teams need to take losses financially to balance the books. Just see the big picture. I would just encourage you to see the big picture. So when going for players, it depends on what the objective is. If we're in a roster rebuild, and with Chicago Sky, for example, it was a rebuild situation. So the first thing I did is trying to recraft the roster. And then part of that was trading Elena Deladon. And I was fortunate that one of my friends was the GM of the New York Knicks at the time. So he was able Scott Perry was a valuable resource for me through the Elena Deladon trade. And just giving me advice on how to navigate that and what to go after. We ended up securing Stephanie Dolson, a second round, number 2 draft pick, and Kalia Copper. And Kalia Copper being a young player straight out of Rutgers. Fast forward a few years later, she ends up getting the MVP of the WNBA. So did not necessarily go for the star power, but got good players, and then they developed and trained and became stars. But
We could show
college was
our
star.
appreciation